Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 17, Matt Donovan and a glance in his leadership playbook. It's time to be forward-thinking, so let's get started. Whether because of his role or just who Matt is, he is one of the most forward-thinking people I know. And with his title, Chief Learning and Innovation Officer, the innovation is what stands out to me. I remember a couple of years ago talking with Matt, and he was telling me about a company that did away with their email. Being a forward thinker is crucial for Matt. In his area, talent development, which is training, learning and development, whatever you want to call it, he needs to look for more innovative and effective ways to train a diverse workforce. In the future, I think people are not going to be changing jobs every 2 to 3 years, but every 2 or 3 years, they'll change their career, whether inside their company that they're at now or transitioning to another one. Someone is going to need to train them, and if people are going to frequently make major career changes, the training needs to be good. Keep that in mind as you hear Matt talk about some of his stories. Part 1, A Lesson from the Martial Arts. When you work in an organization, it doesn't take long before conflict occurs, and how you handle that conflict varies. Some people try to ignore it or downplay it, or they talk about the conflict with everyone but the people they have the conflict with. There's a variety of ways of handling conflict, and Matt is about to share one of those ways, but it starts with his father and who he is. Here's Matt.
From my father, I think one of the things I learned with him was in how to work and deal with other people. So a little bit of background around, who my father was, just real quick. Basically, when he was growing up, he didn't have a father. So his father left the family at a very young age. And so his mother raised 2 young boys, working a job she was switchboard operator at AT&T. So pretty much he kind of raised himself and his brother and got into tons of trouble. I'm sure it gave my grandmother tons of heart palpitations regularly, just raising kids while working. But as we were kind of going through life, he ended up then joining the military, had a good path, kind of changed his life trajectory, came out of that, got a business degree, and then went on to law school. So for most of the time when I knew my father, he was actually a lawyer or a judge. Throughout that, a lot of times he would talk about how you kind of work and deal with people. I think one of the things that kind of came open is a counterintuitive story that he shared about how you think differently about how you engage people. He went in the military and he was in Japan, and when he was there, he actually studied Aikido as a martial art in a sense. The concept of Aikido is very different from other types of martial arts in the sense that it's similar to judo in a sense, where you basically use the opponent's energy with them instead of against them. So a lot of other formats is like force upon force. This one's actually so using someone else's force going with that. So if somebody's coming at you with an energy, you basically take their energy and then pull them through and then move them to another space. And so he started to think very differently about how you interact with people. So we often get into where we go around conflict and engagement with others. You have a couple of different strategies with that. And you can either approach it with this force upon opposing force from a conflict strategy, or you can take the energy that they bring at you and then match and then take and use that energy and that force. And so he had a poem that he taught me when I was a kid, and he said, "There once was a man who drew a circle that included us out. We had a wit and will to win. We drew a circle that included him in." And the concept behind that is that instead of this thing of saying when we're engaging and connecting people, we want to break into and physically connect and drive into their space, and overcome their will by forcing ourselves into their space. And what I learned from that one is that you can actually, if you think broader and almost from a more systemic standpoint, if you take a step back and drew an actual larger circle that included that individual in, rather than trying to force that person or yourself into that circle, it changed it. So it started to really flip the way that I thought about, how we engage folks. It opened up different dimensions of how we connect with folks. It started to allow me to think that, there isn't a one size fits all in engaging and working with people. Like in so many ways, coaching, mentoring, leading, you need a variety of approaches and techniques to that. Sometimes the direct will work and is appreciated, and other times you need to work broader and wrap around them. So that's an example of one thing where it very early on started to shift the way that I was thinking about things and engaging with folks.
When I hear you say that, I was thinking of the Aikido metaphor, and the way you described it is you use your opponent's energy. Well, and trying to converting that into something mental is pretty cool, because it takes it one step beyond that concept, and it's not use your opponent's energy against them. You use your opponent's energy to not make them an opponent and bring them in. I love the metaphor of the circles and how you can change that whole perspective. So that's pretty deep.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, and it balances that thing. And I think, I like the way you talked about it, not really turning the person into an opponent, but really Aikido is often, it translates. I think when people translate it, it's kind of like the way of unifying life energy, a way of harmonious spirit where you're coming together with an energy rather than a clash of energy. And it's a bringing together and connection with that, and it can be a way in which you can still have your energy and their energy, but they can come together in a more synergistic way.
Part 2, how should leadership shift? Because of Matt's talent development background, Matt has some ideas about how we should think about leadership. What you're about to hear is one of the difficulties in instructional design in the training area. Follow along, because the problem is analogous to leadership. Here's Matt.
One of the challenges we've had in the broader L&D industry for the longest time is that it almost set us up in this model where we would go forward and we'd start off with some analysis, we'd bring in some data. It wasn't a very learner-centric process. It was a content-centric process, or topic-centric. And so the ability to kind of go in. And so as designers, we got this almost power sense of being able to craft and create these solutions. And the success would rise and fall upon, the skill of the designer to design something brilliant and beautiful as a primary agent. But what we've learned is that now when you have new devices, new technologies, new environments, rapidly changing, thinking about even COVID and business practices and business processes, the impact and how we connect with customers or virtually work together, the concept of being able to identify what good looks like changes. Because the traditional design model starts off with, what good looks like, and then you just go through the process and you build it. So you set your blueprint in your design document and you build it specifically off of that. So when you kind of get to the process of being able to collaboratively get to what good looks like, it's absolutely critical when we don't know what good looks like. So we're collaboratively defining what good looks like together. And the shift is that your design criteria aren't very fixed and very tight. You actually have what I would say experience criteria. What do we want it to feel like? What do we want it to be able to think or through? So these are guiding principles that guide the decision. So the actual manifestation or the outputs or the path we take can actually vary as long as we're aligning to some commonly shared principles and values and how we connect, and taking the time up front to talk about what do we want this to look like? What do we want the leadership experience to look like? How do we want it to feel? How will we know when it's working and when it's not? It's almost stepping back instead of defining and saying, this is how the transactional leadership experience will be. It's different from that. And I think it's important to be able to kind of keep that in mind.
Before we continue, I need to tell you about something called Agile. Agile is a collection of principles that project managers and software developers use. Here's the idea. Teams focus on developing work in small chunks, and they deliver that to the customers while all the time continuously evaluating the process and the results. The intent of doing all this is to enable teams to respond to change more efficiently. In other words, adapt. There's something called the Agile Manifesto, which is a collection of these principles. And this is something that Matt references. Again, here's Matt.
Going back to the concept of the Agile Manifesto, at the time, people that were creating software projects and from a process and an approach standpoint said there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way by starting and incorporating the user into design through, rapid prototyping and other techniques. But they started off instead of, what used to be a very linear structured process for the actual development of software. Not to say that Agile obviously has a process with it, but it shifted. The concept of the manifesto started off to define what should the experience of this be. And leadership in itself, sometimes we get wrapped away with rigid management structures and rigid management tactics that we lose what the intent of leadership was meant to be. We get wrapped around that and we miss that. And that's that ability to kind of slow down, open ourselves up, go back to the principles, go back to the key components that help shape what interactions look like. And it's not me leading you, it's us working together to kind of define as we explore, because in most situations today, we don't know what good looks like. We don't, but we have to have a process to, iteratively and collaboratively get there together. But using those rules, those rules of engagement or those in experience principles to kind of help us kind of connect. And I think, having a working set of those, I know you kind of pulled, several of those together from what you were looking at, from the books that you were kind of pulling together. But it's like for each individual, it's kind of like setting, what is that experience? Starting off with, I think, kind of going through it, and it kind of sets up when. One of my big advocacy now for organizations, and I do have a parallel point here, it ties in nicely, but it gets into having what I call a learner experience playbook and going out and saying, for an organization, can you describe what you want your learner experience to be like? And don't talk to me about modality. Don't talk to me about curriculum structure. I want to know what you want the learner experience to be in your organization. And that can, you can think through segments or structures, but the idea is, can you describe to me what you want your learner experience to be, which makes you force and think about what the learner-centric perspective is in that, and then building it. It's no different than any organization that has a customer that engages with an external consumer for their services or goods. You have an idea of, what do I want my customer experience playbook to be? What do you want the customer experience to be when they engage with your organization? And you kind of set and map that out. And I think in many ways, from a parallel, thinking as a leader, what do you want your leadership experience to be? What does your leadership experience playbook look like? And what I mean is, when folks connect with you as a leader and you work with each other, how would you map out and define what you want that experience to be? And so having that leadership experience playbook helps you kind of come back to, no matter what the instances are, you're getting back to those core tenets, those core principles that guide the way that you want people to feel, think, know, do when they interact with you.
And it functions as your
others.
It functions as your compass.
But it starts with the other centric. I mean, sometimes I know we start with us as the leader and we focus and we say, I need to be able to focus on others. But there's a difference between being able to describe your experience from the start about them, from the very beginning. What do you want them to experience when engaging with you? Not Well, I want my engagement to them to be very, other centric. Now you start the experience from their perspective and say, what would it be like to experience, what I want them to have a great leadership experience with me? What does that look like? And kind of mapping that
Oh,
exercise, defining what it is, it shifts it to an other centric. And there are definitely tenets that go back to the literature, of several other folks that have kind of come back. But, applying this design centric versus what I'd say content or action specific, this one's about what's the experience mapping that you want folks to have. And I think for me, what started to resonate with me is that mental shift between those design practices that I was sharing out earlier, which we said, yeah, we need to think about the learner when we design, but here's what
mm,
I want them to know and learn at the end of this. No. At the end of this, what do people need from me? What do they, why even, what would make me even a relevant leader for them? How would I deliver the concept of relevance as a leader for them? There has to be a point of mutual benefit, of mutual goal, mutual outcome. There has to be that basic tenet of there's a reason for us to connect, in shared leadership. There has to be a reason for it. I mean, if not, why are we really doing that? I mean, I think that's just saying otherwise. It's a basic social interaction.
Part 3, Virtual Collaboration Overload. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of teams have gone virtual, and by going virtual, they're having a harder time connecting, talking, interacting. People in management, they're having to do more of a check-in to make sure their people are all right. Like a lot of people, even Matt has had to deal with more virtual. And he talks a little bit about his experience in working with people that report up to him. Again, here's Matt.
So let's take it back to virtual is one
Okay.
of the things. So many of us are actually having to deal with engaging with each other virtually. And
Yes.
even though in the future we're going to go back, so, building, rapport and connections while you're dealing with less of the sensory data that we normally have, if you're not always using your video cameras and things like that. But I think, one of the big things is taking the time to lean in to gather that extra data around that, to take the time. I think with the stress on the virtual, we take a lot of that for granted. We get on, I've scheduled a meeting, we start chatting, we start, breaking down the task, we try to get to it, and we have a meeting, and then we kind of go out. Now, if you're in a face-to-face situation, I kind of come in, they can look at you, what kind of day you're having, I can see what kind of day you're having. Do we need to take a moment? I have more data to kind of figure out, emotionally where you're at, because I can kind of physically see the reinforcement. I can see the way you've entered the room, the way you're talking, the way you're connecting with others. Where are you at? I can measure that presence to be able to kind of get more of a read. In the virtual way, because we have the absence of that data, we don't know what that is. So you've got to find new ways to get the data when you're in, to bring that data in on how I connect with you and how we can better create that experience. I've got to stop and actually find ways to get new data because
Yeah.
it's really stressed and virtual.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing you saying is that when you're interacting with someone virtually, especially in this COVID environment, you have to get that data, you have to check in with the person.
Yeah, I mean, checking in with them, asking them where they're at, what are they going, creating space. Even setting some of those expectations of saying, all right, let's without trying to create it, a ridiculous environment, turning your camera on. I know that's been a simple one that a lot of folks have talked to, and that, but I don't feel like being on camera, but it helps drive engagement, encourages other folks to do that, even if it's for, the check-in in the beginning, even
Mhm.
if it's just for a couple minutes to kind of connect with others. But that gives you another data point. Then asking them, how are you doing? What's going on? Taking notes to kind of remember, good practices to say, not only just know the questions to ask, but listen to the answers. I mean, sounds obvious, but in this busy, busy world that we're in, many of us, sometimes get to, oh yeah, that's the right questions I should ask. And we'll even ask the question, but do we listen to the answers? because I'm focused on, I've asked you how you're feeling or what's going on, but I'm thinking about the 9 things I got to cover in this meeting.
Gotcha.
And we have some shared goals to kind of get through this stuff. But there is a point of diminishing return. I mean, you also at the same time, we can't automatically unpack everything that we're all dealing with. So finding that mechanism to connect, to open up, to think through, create space for insights and connections. It's an experience for these folks that you're trying to do. Your experience can be transactional, your experience can be other focused, and still achieve the outcomes. It's more difficult to be open, ask those questions, listen to it, kind of set aside the immediate agenda, knowing that it actually may make the agenda, the outcomes of the meeting actually better by taking time to do this. But knowing when to kind of put it, enough into the energy to kind of pull that forward, still be able to kind of facilitate, move through, and get things done. I mean, leadership without impact isn't relevant.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
just great conversations is nice, but we didn't achieve any outcomes. So I think it gets back to being able to pull and take time to pull that data from others to help better understand and listen to the answers. And I find myself struggling with that. I'm at home with a 5 and a 10-year-old, 2 working parents, 2 kids that are essentially homeschooled, at the same time, my son's in 5th grade, going through 6th grade math, which is, I think we're all experiencing familial math rage as a group. I guess that could actually be a whole nother experiential activity, kind of like, taking the approach to learning algebra at a distance is similar to putting somebody into an escape room that you're pretty sure there's no escape from.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, we're all dealing with that, and it's like I get on the phone and I gotta still push out something. I gotta do something, and it's like taking time to kind of realize that everybody else is kind of in similar but different conditions, and saying, how will that help drive what we need to do? Because even at the end of this meeting, if we don't accomplish something at the end of this meeting, it was a waste of the meeting, and that doesn't help them either. So balancing that, because we need to have a shared outcome from this, but I need to know where you're at, taking time, even when I'm coming in an emotionally challenged space and time. I think that kind of, and that's hard to do, to have that presence. But I have found that when I take the time, and you get better at it, with, if you take those notes, those field observation notes, if you want to get very clinical about it, you kind of go through the questions, you listen to the answers, you jot some notes down, you make that connection, and you still bring, to know that why we met here, while we're still doing some things, I felt like you attended to me as a person, you attended to me professionally in a work, we were able to get through what we needed to. And then I was able to kind of work these things into longer term series of conversations, not just this meeting today, but what are we trying to achieve or come together on, and then leading teams to take time to do that, setting out times to sometimes just reflect and bring those things through. So anyway, I think that's probably something folks have heard, but it's easy to say, hard to implement.
Yeah. But I like the idea of field observation notes and trying to balance out the purpose of the meeting, the outcomes of the meeting, to checking in to understand the people you're working with, their situations, because they, the reality is that we do have families. We're helping our children try to survive algebra while we survive it as well. But being aware of all that, it seems so critical and appreciated. I've heard podcasts where someone has said, every time my boss talked to me, the first thing he would ask, "How are you doing? How are your children doing?" And it meant so much that it actually amped up the engagement.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think there is that sweet spot where you get maximum return on that investment for those energy, those activities. I think there absolutely is. Are you familiar with Rob Cross by chance? He kind of
No.
fits into the organizational network of analytics kind of space, the ONA space. He actually had an HBR article. It's been out for a little while, but he's focused on the concept of collaboration overload. And I think that
it's a very interesting but important conversation around collaboration. Overload is a sense that you can be too collaborative to a disadvantage. And where I'm kind of pulling that in is to think that there is a sweet spot around being able to kind of connect and achieve an outcome, because being able to achieve and close things out and get things done is still important to be able to do. Simple collaboration just for collaboration's sake can actually be distracting. Too little collaboration and obviously risk the ability to be able to execute. The same thing, I think, in leadership wise, sometimes we take those interpersonal dynamics sometimes too far to a point where it can be distractive in a sense. So you can have that. So how do you balance it? It's that balance that really works for everybody. Knowing when you need to take the time and knowing when it's just as important to collectively, let's get some things done.
My thanks to Matt for joining the show. If you want, go to the show notes for links to find out more about Matt and some of the things we talked about. If you have any questions or comments, you can go to Unlabeled Leadership and click the message icon and leave a message up to 1 minute. Maybe I'll play it on a show. Thank you for supporting the show, and thank you for listening. Until next time, lead on.